The mountains of Northern California are breathtaking, with their towering peaks, deep valleys, and dense forests. But their beauty can conceal untold dangers. I learned this firsthand one dark summer many years ago. Eager to get away from the stresses of daily life, I decided to go camping alone deep in the Trinity Alps for a few days. This rugged wilderness seemed like the perfect place to find solitude and appreciate nature. Of course, being by myself far from civilization also meant facing risks. But I was young and fearless, too naive to consider what could go wrong. After packing my gear and supplies, I set off for the trailhead under a bright, cloudless sky. The backcountry called to me as I marched up the path into the mountains. Little did I know the horrors that awaited me there in the enveloping darkness. By journey's end, I would learn there are some places where humans are not meant to tread alone. I had been planning this solo camping trip for weeks. As an experienced camper, I made sure I was fully prepared. I packed all of my essential supplies: tent, sleeping bag, camp stove, first aid kit, flashlight, and plenty of food and water to last several days. I also brought extra batteries, matches, and a compass just in case. Knowing I'd be completely alone in the wilderness, I took every precaution. I let my family know exactly where I would be camping and how long I planned to stay. I also checked the weather forecast to ensure favorable conditions. Though nervous about camping solo, I felt ready for the adventure ahead. I pulled into the campground in the late afternoon. It was tucked away in a heavily wooded area with tall pine trees providing plenty of shade. A cute little creek bubbled through the site, and there were a dozen or so campsites with picnic tables and fire pits. After checking in at the ranger station, I drove around looking for the perfect spot to set up for the night. I chose a site on the outer loop, nestled between the tree line and the creek. It felt private and serene. I parked my car and started unpacking my gear. First, I set up my tent, staking it into the soft ground. Next, I rolled out my sleeping bag inside and blew up my air mattress. With shelter ready, I moved on to starting a campfire. I gathered dry twigs and logs from the surrounding woods and neatly stacked them in the fire pit. After a few sparks from my lighter, I had a cozy fire going. The warmth and glow made my little campsite feel extra homey. With camp fully set up, I took time to appreciate the natural beauty around me. The babbling creek provided a calming soundtrack. Birds chirped their evening songs as the sunlight filtered through the tall pines. I breathed in the fresh, woodsy air and took in the simplicity of this place. For tonight, this little spot in the woods would be my home. The first night at the campground was uneventful, at least at first. I had arrived early in the afternoon, giving me plenty of time to set up my tent, gather firewood, and take a short hike before sunset. As dusk fell, I got a fire going and cooked a simple dinner of hot dogs and beans over the flames. Sitting by the crackling fire, underneath a sky full of stars, I was looking forward to a peaceful night of solitude in nature. But as I ate, an unsettling feeling slowly came over me. I felt like I was being watched from the darkness beyond the circle of firelight. The loud crack of a burning log made me jump. I strained to hear any unusual sounds over the normal nighttime noises. Insects chirping, leaves rustling, branches creaking in the breeze. But no matter how intently I listened, I couldn't pinpoint anything out of the ordinary. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination getting the best of me. After all, I was out here alone. Who or what could be watching me? Still, I couldn't shake the creeping sensation of unseen eyes tracking my every move. The peaceful solitude I had anticipated had turned into tense unease. I found myself glancing repeatedly over my shoulder into the impenetrable darkness behind me. But all I could see were shadows swaying to the flickering glow of the firelight. As night fell and darkness enveloped the campsite, an eerie silence permeated the forest. The usual sounds of birds and wildlife had faded away, leaving only the gentle wind rustling the trees. Sitting beside the crackling campfire, Alex tried to relax, but felt a growing unease. The isolation and stillness was unnerving, so different from the lively sounds of the city. Out of nowhere, a branch snapped loudly in the distance, making Alex jump. It sounded large, too large to be a squirrel or other small creature. Alex peered out into the inky blackness, but the firelight revealed nothing. Again, Alex heard the snapping of branches, along with heavy footsteps crunching on the forest floor. The footsteps seemed to be circling the camp's perimeter, staying just out of sight. Alex's pulse quickened, imagining what sinister presence could be lurking in the darkness. As the night wore on, Alex heard more odd noises, heavy breathing, guttural grunts, and the snorting of a large animal. Fear gripped Alex, realizing something was stalking the campsite, biding its time. Staying utterly still, Alex prayed for sunrise when the light would finally reveal what evil had come in the night. I awoke the next morning feeling uneasy. The prior night's events weighed heavily on my mind as I emerged from my tent. Looking around the campsite in the early morning light, things at first appeared normal. As I began to survey the perimeter of the camp, however, I noticed some strange markings in the dirt surrounding my tent. Kneeling down to inspect them closer, they appeared to be animal tracks of some kind. However, they were much larger than any local wildlife I'd expect to encounter. The tracks encircled the camp in an unsettling way, as if something had been lurking just out of sight, watching me as I slept. A chill went down my spine as I followed them around, observing their unusual size and shape. While it was hard to identify the exact origin of the tracks, it was clear that something out of the ordinary had visited my campsite overnight. I felt a growing sense of unease, as if I was being watched from the forest around me. The otherwise serene setting suddenly took on an air of menace that left me checking nervously over my shoulder every few moments. While the bright morning sun was tranquil, I couldn't help but feel a lingering sense that something was out there, just out of view. Those strange tracks left me wary and made me question if I truly was alone out there in the wilderness after all. I awoke with a start in the dead of night, my heart racing. Something had startled me, but in my groggy state I couldn't remember what. As I laid there in the dark, straining to hear any unusual sounds, a chill went down my spine. That's when I heard it again, a blood-curdling screech coming from somewhere outside the tent. I froze, paralyzed by fear. The screeching continued, echoing through the woods. It sounded like some wounded animal, but with an almost human-like tone that made my skin crawl. Gripped by terror, I huddled in my sleeping bag, praying it would stop. But the screeching only grew louder and more frantic. My mind was racing. What could be making those horrible sounds? A mountain lion? No, it sounded far too human for that. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe a bird, or the wind playing tricks. But deep down, I knew this was something far more sinister. The screeching suddenly stopped, replaced by the sound of heavy footsteps circling my tent. Something was out there, and it knew I was here. I sat petrified, clutching my sleeping bag. The footsteps grew faster, more aggressive, as if preparing to charge. Then, to my horror, something slammed against the side of my tent, nearly collapsing it on top of me. I screamed in sheer terror as the thing outside let out a blood-curdling howl and began violently thrashing my tent. It was trying to get inside. I reacted on pure adrenaline. I burst out of my tent and sprinted as fast as I could into the woods, screaming for help. Behind me, I heard the creature let out one final enraged shriek before the forest fell silent. I ran until I couldn't breathe, finally collapsing in exhaustion. I never saw what it was that attacked my tent that night. The next morning, I packed up and fled that campsite, vowing to never go camping alone again. But the memory of that terrifying encounter will be forever burned into my mind. I sat there stunned, struggling to process what had just happened. The campsite was eerily quiet now, almost like the forest was holding its breath. My heart pounded in my ears as adrenaline continued to course through my veins. What was that thing? Some kind of animal? A person? I couldn't wrap my head around it. One moment I was sitting peacefully by the fire, and the next, this thing came barreling out of the woods right at me. I don't think I'd ever moved so fast in my life. As the initial panic subsided, the reality of my situation began to sink in. I was out here, completely alone, miles away from anyone, and something was out here with me. I looked around the darkened campsite, eyes straining into the shadows. The fire had died down to barely a flicker, leaving just faint wisps of smoke drifting up between the trees. I hastily piled on more wood, desperate to build the fire back up. I needed that light, that warmth. Mostly, I just needed to feel less alone. What should I do now? Try to go back to sleep, wait till morning and get the hell out of here. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving me shaken and exhausted. But each little sound from the forest snapped me back alert. Maybe I should just pack up and leave. But the thought of stumbling through the pitch-black woods filled me with almost as much dread as staying put. I still had no idea what was out there or where it was now. As much as I wanted to flee, it seemed safer to stay by the fire till daylight. I'd reassess in the morning whether to continue camping or cut my losses. All I could do now was hunker down and try to stay calm. Easier said than done, though, as my mind raced playing out all the possible horrors that could emerge from the darkness. This was meant to be a peaceful solo camping trip, a chance to reset. Now it had turned into a true nightmare. I just had to hold it together till sunrise. There are a few possible explanations for the creepy encounter while camping alone that night. One is that it could have simply been wild animals making noises and moving around the campsite, but in the darkness and isolation, my mind perceived them as something more sinister. Deer, raccoons, squirrels, and even owls can make strange noises at night that could seem supernatural. Another possibility is that I was experiencing night terrors or hypnagogic hallucinations. When camping alone, it's not uncommon for the mind to play tricks, especially when startled awake in the middle of the night. The stress and unfamiliar surroundings could have triggered vivid hallucinations that felt extremely real in the moment. I also can't rule out that someone was messing with me, playing a prank or trying to scare me away from the campsite. It's possible some local kids followed me and waited until I fell asleep to create strange noises using branches, rocks, and other props. In the solitary forest setting, these sounds could have been amplified and seemed more ghostly than they were. While the encounter felt truly disturbing and inexplicable, upon reflection there are plausible explanations based on animals, hallucinations, and pranks. Still, at the time, my mind raced to imagine paranormal causes in the dark isolation of the forest. The fear felt real, even if the exact source remains a mystery. With the faint light of dawn on the horizon, I quickly packed my bags and left the campsite. My hands shook as I hurriedly stuffed my tent and supplies into my backpack, making sure to put as much distance between me and that spot deep in the woods. The terror of last night was still gripping him, and images of those glowing eyes and strange voices flashed through my mind. I had barely slept, and was too afraid to let my guard down as the darkness pressed in around my tent. I have never felt such an overwhelming feeling of fear. Now, in the early morning light, the forest looked completely normal again. But I knew that what I experienced was real. There was something sinister lurking there in the shadows. As I walked quickly back to my car, I remembered the events of that horrific night. I regretted coming here alone and not telling anyone where I was. A reckless mistake that almost cost me my life. Back in the safety of civilization, I made a promise to myself never to go camping alone again. It was best to face the isolation and unknown of nature with trusted companions. And although I may not fully understand what happened to him in that dark forest, I knew that I was lucky to have escaped with my life. The memories will haunt me forever, a reminder that there are some places in this world where humans should never go alone.